Hi folks. We're going to do a little MLA refresher today, not the full Monty, because you've already learned that a couple of times. But we're going to talk about some things that people are commonly having problems with. So this is just a troubleshooting session on MLA. You did have your last assignment, your last response paper. I asked you to do a works cited page and to cite your sources, even though we don't typically do that in response papers, because I wanted to see kind of where we were. I had several questions. I had a few turned in that obviously didn't realize they needed to ask questions. So we're just going to take a few minutes and hit some of the high points that people are having trouble with. One, when you do a quote or a paraphrase, and this is something, write this on your hand. When you reference a source, whether you quote it directly, paraphrase it, or just summarize it, you must refer to that source in your paper. You can either do that by including it in the text, or by using a parenthetical notation, or in some cases, both. Now, here's the key thing to remember. If you use a portion of what would be in your parenthetical notation, which ordinarily would be the first word of your works cited entry, so usually the author's name, this one would look like this. Right? Simpson 84. If you mention the author's name in the text, like we have in this sentence, according to learned scholar Bart Simpson, and then our quote, you can omit the author's name from the parenthetical notation, which is what we've done. Now, will you have sources that have no page numbers? Yes. And if you've done your works cited page right, I or any reader can tell that that's what's happened. This was a website, for instance. If you are given reference numbers of any kind, whether it's a page number, and even with online sources, you will sometimes have page numbers because they'll be PDFs. I've shared things with you online in Google Classroom that were copied from books, and therefore they had page numbers. If that's the case, you need to use that page number. Sometimes websites with articles on them will give you paragraph numbers. If that's the case, you need to use the paragraph number, and it will look like this. PAR, lowercase with a period, 16. Sometimes with literature, they'll number lines in a piece of poetry, for instance. Anytime you're given a reference number like that, you should use it. If you're not, if you've used a website, for instance, and you have no page numbers, paragraph numbers, anything like that, then you just, if you've mentioned the author or the first word of the works cited page in your, or the first word of your works cited entry, in your text like this, if you've said, according to learned scholar Bart Simpson or whoever, you simply won't have a parenthetical notation. It won't appear. But the important thing, and this is always the rule of thumb, and it's always the thing to remember, because most professors care more about you understanding the system than they do about where all the commas and semicolons and periods go. Okay? The important thing to remember is every time you reference a source, whatever that source is, it's clear in the text that this came from some other person and who it came from. So, if you mess up a few little details here and there, worst case scenario, and that's with the strictest research professor you're going to have. Worst case scenario, it may be the difference between an A and a B. But usually it's going to be a matter of a point here or there because you've obviously understood documentation as a system. Now, so, takeaways from that. You can omit information in your parenthetical notation if it already appears in the text. Now, we'll erase Bart Simpson. And here's the other thing that people are finding really challenging, and those are the works cited entries themselves. I think that's because you believe you need to learn it, and you don't. Works cited entries require no intelligence, no talent, no giftedness whatsoever. They're simply time consuming. So I want you to right now go to page 433 in your textbook, 433. And what you're going to see there is something called an index of MLA works cited entries. And it's going to list all the sources that they think you're likely to use. If you use something other than these, oh Lord, there's probably 100 here. But if you use a source that isn't described in any of these, which can happen, all you have to do is ask me. Drop me an email, drop into a Google Meet, anything like that, and say, I've got this source. It doesn't seem to be described at all on page 433. What do I do? Because there are, the actual MLA book that the Modern Language Association puts out every time they do an update is probably that thick and full of models like this to cover almost anything that they think you could ever possibly use. There is a model for kind of coming up with your own, even in the case that you're using something so bizarre that no one else has ever used it before. That's highly unlikely. A couple of things that are worth talking about, because we're having a little trouble with them. If you look under books, print, selection from an anthology or edited collection. An anthology, and this is a word you're going to need to know in college because we use them all the time. An anthology is just a collection of other essays. So, this, and you'll have this kind of book over and over again in classes in college. This is an anthology. It's just a collection of essays that you read and to bring to an educational experience, usually. I mean, short story collections of varying authors. Those are also anthologies. I've got a lot of horror anthologies. I like reading horror short stories. People like Lovecraft. I've got a lot of those. Those are anthologies. I've got a lot of anthologies of mystery stories because I like reading those too. Collections of like the best British mystery stories of the 20th century or whatever. Those are anthologies. And not for nothing, so is this. Even though the first chunk of this book is all written by the author, the last chunk, where all of your supplemental essays are, that is an anthology. So if you need to cite an essay from this book, you use the model selection from an anthology or edited collection. Now that's on 435. This works just like a table of contents. And there is no reason for you to know how to do this. Nobody knows. You always use the model. So, on 435, we go down the page just like you would in a dictionary until we find a selection or chapter from an anthology or a collection with an editor. And they give you a model. It's not the same words. It's not the same book, but you plug in the piece, the elements of the piece you're working on. So in this case, if you're looking now at page 435, it starts with O'Connor, comma, Flannery. That's the author of the individual piece. Last name first. I'm not sure I spelled her name right, did I? Nope. That's followed by a period. Then open quotes, because short pieces, essays, poems, short stories, most of the time anything you would find in an anthology, plays are an exception, but we'll skip that. Essays, poems, short stories, any short piece like that that's likely to be collected in a larger work goes in quotation marks. Now this is a weird little mnemonic and not everybody's brain works the same. But for me, it's easy to think of quotation marks designating small things and underlining, because it's long, designating longer works. You know what? Let's do our actual textbook based on the model, because you've got the model right in front of you, so you don't need me to do that for you. Let's pick something out of our textbook. It's a random thing. Putting up with hate. No, that's the editorial board. Judging by the cover. 657. Bonnie Gainley. Period. Remember? Title of the article. In this case, it is Judging by the Cover. Period, I think. But I don't remember for sure, so I'm going to go back to the model. Yes, period, close quotes. Title of the collection, in this case, Steps to Writing Well. And that, because it's a book, long things are underlined. Back to our model. In the model, edited, that's what the ED means. Laurie G. Kersner and Stephen R. Mandel. Okay, so in our case, who's the editor? Gene Wyrick. Ninth edition is in our model. Does our book have an edition? It does. Do I have to write out edition? I don't know. I can't remember. Nobody can. That's why you use the model. I shouldn't have capitalized that, so I just erased it and fixed it. City of publication. If you don't know where this is, it's usually right underneath the logo for the publishing company. So, in our case, it's right here. On the back of the very first page, if you look down, you see Cengage Learning, that's the publishing company. Boston, So, colon, I would never know that without looking at the model. We just looked at the publishing company, we know now that's Cengage. Should have been a comma, not a period. Publication date, that's the most recent copyright date. So in our case, 2017. That same page at the very front that gives you the ISBN number if you're gonna order it, that tells you where Cengage Learning is located, that same page at the top, copyright, 2017. In our model, 367-78. Those are the page numbers. So we go back to our essay, 657 in this book to 658. Looks like this. And then print. Unless you're working from an ebook, which I know some of you are, in which case where that says print, it will say ebook. Okay? You notice how time consuming that was. You have to go back to the model and match the model to the piece that you're working on. But it's not hard. It's not easy to screw up or anything like that. It just takes time. But that's the way you do it. You just match it to the model. And I know you're used to knowing things by heart, to actually learning them and internalizing them. But this is a thing nobody knows by heart. Professional scholars can probably do the book by one author off the top of their head. I can do a book by one author off the top of my head. I may get a period in the wrong place. But people who write professional scholarly work for publication, they can probably do that off the top of their head. But none of these others. Professional scholars have an actual copy of the MLA handbook on their bookshelf, and they have to pull it out and use it whenever they want to cite anything the least bit complicated. So that's the way you do it. Page 433, write it on your hand. That's the index of models, and you just apply the model to whatever piece you're using. And then if we were going to actually cite Bonnie Gainley's essay in our paper, I'm not sure I've read it and I'm not sure what it's about, but we'll look. Oh, yeah, I have. That was part of your reading this time. Some of you used it. I misspelled her name, by the way. There's a good paraphrase for us. Okay, discrimination on the basis of factors an applicant can't control is wrong. Choosing the candidate who displays the attributes and skills that best match their job description is not. So we could say something like, in her argument, Bonnie Gainley of writing for the Coloradoan. These author descriptions help you because they lend credibility to your sources. And the Coloradoan, because it's a newspaper, is underlined. Okay, now this is a paraphrase, and it is appropriately what a paraphrase looks like. I've put that completely in my own words. Here's how the original sounded. Discrimination on the basis of factors an applicant can't control is wrong and illegal. Choosing the candidate who displays the attributes and skills that best match a job description is not. In her argument, Bonnie Gainley, writing for the Coloradoan, left out a comma, claims discrimination is bad only if the victim can't control the factor in play. I've put that completely in my own words. That's a proper paraphrase. And because I have mentioned Gainley in the text, all I have to put here is the page number. That's it. Now, if I had hewn closer to her words in the text, instead of completely putting that in my own words, I would need to use a direct quote. What you don't want is something in between. We call that patch writing. It's where you kind of lift somebody's sentence, but you replace certain words with synonyms. It is a very common form of plagiarism. It's hardly ever intentional. Nobody would go to all that effort and still screw up, but this is what a proper paraphrase looks like. And this would be the proper way to cite it, and this would be what its works cited entry looks like. Now, I like almost always mentioning the author in the text because you're using this for evidence, and this lends credibility to who your source is. But you could also do this. One article from the Coloradoan claims discrimination is bad only if the victim can't control the factor in play. Now, even though you've mentioned the Coloradoan in that sentence, you haven't mentioned the first words of your works cited entry, which in this case is the author. In that case, your parenthetical notation should look like this. I really hope that helps. I don't think we're in desperate straits when it comes to MLA at all. But the reason I wanted you to do documentation on this little response paper is so we could get some things like this out of the way. If you have any questions, you know where I am. Drop me an email. Show up to a Google Meet. I'm doing Google Meets Tuesdays and Thursdays at 1:30 and Fridays at 11 a.m. You can drop into any of those. And of course, I'm happy to set up a private Google Meet with you if you want to. Our word of the week, remember you get 10 extra points on any response paper or quiz. So it's not a whole lot, but it is a little bit, especially if you've had trouble with some of those assignments. The word of the week, this SAT word, is sporadic. You can use any form. You can use sporadic, you can use sporadically. That's up to you. In any communication with me, you can either put it in a paper or you can drop it in an email or anything like that. Just use it correctly in a sentence. I hope you are having or have had, depending on when you get to this video. It's not actually assigned till after Thanksgiving, but I'm going to go ahead and put it up there for those of you who want to go watch it. I hope you are having or did have a very nice Thanksgiving. I hope you're staying safe. I hope you and your family are well. Take care.